The house was my sanctuary before it was our home. I bought it with the inheritance my grandmother left me, a final gift from a woman who believed a woman's first and most important possession should be her own roof. It was a charming little bungalow with a crooked porch and a sprawling backyard filled with unruly rose bushes. I spent 2 years pouring my heart and my savings into it, refinishing the hardwood floors until they gleamed, painting the walls in shades of sea glass and sunshine. Every corner of it was a reflection of me. It was mine completely and utterly before I even met my husband. When I married him, I didn't just invite him into my life, I invited him into my home, and for 5 years it was a happy arrangement. We were a team. He respected the history of the house, the love I had for it. It was our shared haven. The invasion began with a phone call and a manufactured crisis. His father, my father-in-law, had a health scare. It was a vague, nonspecific event involving high blood pressure and a doctor's recommendation to avoid stress. At the same time, as if by a terrible coincidence, the sale of their own home was finalized, but the condo they were moving into wouldn't be ready for another month. My mother-in-law's voice on the phone was a symphony of panic and pathetic pleading. They had nowhere to go. Could they possibly, just for a few weeks, a month at the most, stay with us? My husband looked at me, his eyes wide with concern for his parents. "They're in a tough spot," he'd said. "It's just temporary. I was a good wife. I was a kind person. I loved my husband, and his parents, despite their occasional overbearing nature, were family." "Of course," I said, a decision I would come to regret with every fiber of my being. "They're welcome here." The first week was a performance of perfect guest etiquette. They were grateful, complimentary, and almost invisible. But by week 2, the slow, creeping annexation of my home began. It was a war of 1,000 tiny aggressions. My mother-in-law started in the kitchen, my favorite room in the house. She reorganized my spice rack alphabetically, a system that made no sense to a cook who navigates by instinct. She bought new, heavier pots and pans and pushed mine to the back of the cupboard. "The ones you have are so flimsy, dear," she'd say with a saccharine smile. "I'm just helping." My father-in-law took over the garage. My gardening tools were relegated to a dusty corner to make way for his woodworking equipment. The scent of sawdust and varnish began to permanently permeate the air. He decided the fence needed painting, a project he started with great enthusiasm and then abandoned halfway through, leaving a chaotic mess of brushes and tarps that became a permanent feature of the backyard. My husband was my first line of defense, and he failed spectacularly. In the beginning, he was apologetic. "Just give them time to settle, honey. They're just trying to feel useful." Then, as my complaints became more frequent, he shifted into the role of exasperated mediator. "Can't you just try to be a little more understanding? My father's health is delicate." His pleas for my understanding were never matched by pleas for their consideration. Finally, he became their greatest champion, their most loyal soldier. When I protested that his mother had rearranged the living room furniture while I was at work, he said, "I think it looks nice. It's more open this way. You're being too sensitive." His words were a constant, gentle drip of gaslighting that slowly eroded my confidence, making me question if I was the one who was unreasonable, the one who was cruel. The temporary stay bled from 1 month into 3, then 6. The condo they were supposed to be moving into was beset by a series of mysterious, unending delays. Every time I tried to gently broach the subject of a timeline for their departure, I was met with a carefully orchestrated performance of wounded fragility. My mother-in-law would sigh dramatically, her hand flying to her chest. "With all the stress your father is under, how can you even bring that up?" she'd whisper, loud enough for my husband to hear. I was being painted as the villain in my own home. My presence was being systematically erased. My books disappeared from the coffee table, replaced by my father-in-law's fishing magazines. My photos on the mantelpiece were slowly outnumbered by pictures of their family, their vacations, their grandchildren from my husband's sister. I was becoming a ghost, haunting the hallways of a life that was no longer mine. The house, once my sanctuary, began to feel like an enemy prison camp. I would come home from work and linger in my car, steeling myself for the ordeal of walking through my own front door. I would retreat to my bedroom, the last bastion of my territory, only to have my mother-in-law knock on the door to ask what I wanted for dinner, a dinner she was cooking in my kitchen, a dinner I didn't want. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I had a brutal day at work, and all I wanted was a quiet bath and a simple meal. I walked in to find the house teeming with strangers. My in-laws had invited their entire bridge club over for a potluck dinner without a word to me. The air was thick with the smell of strange casseroles and cheap perfume. My mother-in-law, playing the gracious hostess, introduced me not as the owner of the home but as our son's wife. I was an accessory, a footnote in the story of their new life. I cornered my husband in the hallway, my voice a furious whisper. "What is this? How could you let them do this without asking me?" He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He looked annoyed. "They wanted to have some friends over. What's the big deal? It's their home too now." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Their home too. He had given it away. He had taken my sanctuary, the one thing in the world that was truly mine, and he had given it away to them. I looked at him, at his familiar face, and I saw a stranger. I saw a man who had chosen his parents over his wife. I saw a man who had sided with the invaders. In that moment, something inside me broke. The part of me that wanted to be the good wife, the kind daughter-in-law, the understanding partner, it shattered into a million pieces, and in its place something cold and hard and quiet began to grow. I turned without another word and walked to our bedroom, closing the door on the sound of their laughter. They mistook my silence for surrender. They thought they had finally broken me. They couldn't have been more wrong. I wasn't surrendering. I was retreating to plan my counteroffensive. They had all made one critical, catastrophic error. In their rush to conquer my house, they had forgotten one very important detail. They had forgotten who owned it in the first place. My retreat was not a sign of defeat. It was a tactical maneuver. The shock of my husband's betrayal had acted like a bucket of ice water, snapping me out of the fog of disbelief and hurt. I saw the situation for what it was, a hostile takeover, and I knew that to win this war I had to stop fighting the small battles and start planning the final, decisive victory. The first step was to change my own behavior. I performed a complete and convincing surrender. I stopped complaining. I apologized to my husband for being stressed and sensitive. I praised my mother-in-law's cooking and asked for her recipe for the dry, overcooked pot roast that she was so proud of. I listened with feigned interest as my father-in-law recounted his boring stories. They drank it up. Their smugness was a tangible thing, a thick, suffocating smog that filled every room. My husband would pat my arm, telling me how proud he was that I was finally making an effort. My mother-in-law would offer me condescending little smiles of approval. They thought they had successfully re-educated me, broken my will, and molded me into the compliant, background figure they wanted me to be. Their arrogance made them careless. While they were basking in their victory, I was quietly assembling my arsenal. My first stop was the city's Hall of Records. I spent a lunch break getting a newly certified copy of the deed to my house. Holding it in my hands, seeing my name and my name alone as the sole proprietor felt like holding a shield. It was a legal, irrefutable fact in a world that had become a swamp of emotional manipulation. My next move was to find a lawyer. Not a divorce lawyer, that would come later, but a shrewd, sharp-tongued real estate attorney who specialized in tenant disputes and evictions. I found the perfect one, a woman whose online reviews described her as a velvet-gloved hammer. I sat in her office and laid out the entire story. She listened intently, her expression hardening with every detail. When I finished, she looked at the deed in my hand and a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Legally, she said, they are tenants at will. They have no lease and no legal right to the property. They are guests who have overstayed their welcome to an epic degree. We can remove them, it will be clean, but it won't be pretty. She gave me my instructions. The most important one was to document everything. I bought a small, discreet notebook and it became my secret weapon. Every passive-aggressive comment my mother-in-law made, every time my father-in-law treated me like an employee, every instance of my husband siding with them was meticulously recorded with dates, times, and direct quotes. My quiet, agreeable facade was the perfect cover for my intelligence gathering. The second instruction was to secure my assets. I opened a new bank account at a different bank under my name only. I arranged for my paycheck to be deposited there. I quietly gathered my important documents, my passport, my birth certificate, my car title, and the certified deed, and rented a small safe deposit box. I was systematically disentangling my life from theirs, piece by piece, right under their noses. Their gaslighting became more brazen. My mother-in-law would move my car keys and then help me find them, telling me my memory was getting so poor. My husband would deny promises he had made, telling me I must have dreamed the conversation. They were trying to make me believe I was going crazy, that I was an unreliable narrator of my own life. To counter this, I made my most audacious move. Citing a recent spate of porch pirate thefts in the neighborhood, I installed a new home security system. It included several small, wireless cameras. I placed them in the main living areas, the kitchen, the living room, the hallway. I told them it was for our protection. They loved the idea. They saw it as an upgrade to their new home. They had no idea that the cameras were my silent, impartial witnesses, recording their every word, their every act of psychological warfare, streaming it all directly to a secure cloud server that only I could access. The final piece of my plan fell into place when they announced they were planning a real family vacation, a 10-day Caribbean cruise. My husband presented it to me as a done deal. "Mom and Dad have been so stressed, they really need a getaway," he said. And I thought the three of us could really use some quality time. The three of them, I wasn't included. "What about me?" I asked, my voice a perfect imitation of a hurt wife. He had his excuse ready. "Oh, honey, I know you can't get that much time off work on such short notice. And besides," he added, delivering the killing blow with a smile, "someone has to stay here to look after the house." He had just confirmed what I already knew. In his mind, my only remaining function was as a caretaker for the property they had commandeered. I had been demoted from wife to house sitter. I suppressed the rage and feigned disappointment. "You're right," I said, my voice heavy with fake resignation. "You three go, have a wonderful time, you deserve it." They did deserve it. They deserved every single thing that was about to happen to them. The trap was set. All the pieces were in place. All I had to do was wait for them to board that ship. The morning of their departure was a masterclass in deception. I was the very picture of the dutiful, supportive wife. I made them a special breakfast, helped my mother-in-law with her suitcase, and listened patiently as my father-in-law gave me a long, condescending list of instructions about watering the plants and bringing in the mail. My husband kissed me goodbye at the door, a quick, distracted peck on the cheek. "Be good," he said, as if speaking to a child or a dog. "We'll bring you back a souvenir." I smiled, a wide, genuine smile for the first time in months. "Have the trip of a lifetime," I said. "Don't worry about a single thing here. I'll take care of everything." The moment their rental car turned the corner, my house transformed from a prison into a command center. My meticulously planned operation began, timed with military precision. My first call was to the locksmith. Within an hour, every single lock on every door had been replaced with new, high-security deadbolts. The house was now an impenetrable fortress. My second call was to a moving company I had already vetted and placed on standby. A 20-foot truck and a team of 4 efficient, no-nonsense movers arrived exactly at noon. I unlocked the door and gave them their instructions. I had already marked every piece of furniture, every box, every lamp that belonged to my in-laws with a small, color-coded sticker. Their entire bedroom suite, the ugly recliner my father-in-law had installed in my living room, the heavy, dark furniture they had used to colonize my home, it was all professionally wrapped and loaded onto the truck. Then I led the crew to my husband's things. His closet was emptied. His golf clubs, his collection of vintage rock albums, the giant flat-screen television he had bought for the den without consulting me, it all went into the truck. I was not just removing them, I was systematically erasing any evidence that they had ever lived there. By 4:00 p.m. the truck was loaded. I had already rented a large storage unit in my husband's name, using his credit card information which, as his helpful, organized wife, I had on file. The movers transported everything to the unit. I paid for the first month's rent. After that, the bill and the problem would be his. The house felt cavernously empty and wonderfully, blessedly quiet, but I wasn't done. The next crew to arrive was a team of deep cleaners. For 5 hours they scrubbed, polished, and purified my home. They steamed the carpets, washed the walls, and cleaned the windows until the afternoon sun streamed in, bright and clear. The lingering scent of my mother-in-law's cloying potpourri and my father-in-law's cigar smoke was banished, replaced by the clean, sharp smell of lemon and bleach. While the cleaners worked, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. My lawyer had already prepared the documents. I electronically signed the formal eviction notice, a cold, legal document that named all 3 of them as occupants with no legal rights who were now officially trespassing. The notice was emailed to my husband's work and personal accounts and to his parents' email address. My lawyer also sent a separate, legally binding cease and desist letter warning them against any form of contact, harassment, or attempt to enter the property. A hard copy was couriered to the cruise ship's parent company to be delivered to them on board, a little surprise to go with their formal night dinner. The final step was the most satisfying. I called my favorite painter. The next day, the oppressive beige that my mother-in-law had insisted was more sophisticated was gone, painted over with the vibrant, joyful teal I had always loved. The house was not just clean, it was mine again in spirit as well as in fact. That evening I walked through the quiet, empty rooms, my rooms. I ordered a pizza, my favorite kind, with extra olives, the kind my husband always complained about. I opened a bottle of expensive champagne I had been saving. I sat on the floor in the middle of my living room, surrounded by a blissful, beautiful silence, and I toasted to my own liberation. His first call came 2 days later from somewhere in the Caribbean. It was a cheerful, oblivious message left on my voicemail. He was having a great time, the weather was beautiful, and he hoped I wasn't too lonely. I deleted it without a second thought. I knew the real storm wouldn't hit until they stepped off that ship and tried to come home. The day of their return, I felt a calm, almost zen-like focus. I had positioned one of the security cameras to give me a perfect, wide-angle view of the front porch and walkway. With a cup of tea and my laptop, I settled in to watch the final act of the drama I had so carefully orchestrated. The taxi pulled up to the curb precisely on schedule. I watched them get out, looking tanned and relaxed, laden with souvenir bags. They walked up the path, laughing about something, the picture of a happy family returning from a triumphant holiday. The first flicker of confusion crossed their faces when they saw the front door. It was no longer a dull, faded brown, it was a bright, welcoming red, a color I had painted the day before as a final act of reclamation. My father-in-law fumbled with his key, the one he had made without my permission. I watched him try to insert it into the lock. It didn't fit. He tried again, jiggling it with growing frustration. "What's wrong with this thing?" I could faintly hear him grumble through the laptop's microphone. My husband pushed him aside, pulling out his own key. When it also failed, their annoyance curdled into genuine alarm. The banging started, first a polite knock from my mother-in-law, then a more forceful pounding from my husband. "Honey, are you in there? The key isn't working." His voice was laced with an irritation that was rapidly escalating into anger. I, of course, did not answer. The calls to my phone began one after another, a frantic barrage of digital noise. I had set my phone to silent. I sat and watched as my husband's composure completely disintegrated. He was shouting now, his face red with fury, yelling my name, demanding I open the door to our house. It was then that he finally noticed the large, laminated document taped securely to the center of the door. I watched as he tore it off. His face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white as he read the formal, legally binding eviction notice. He stared at the paper, then at the house, then at his bewildered parents, his mind unable to process the reality of the situation. He had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. As I had predicted, his next move was to call the police. A squad car arrived a few minutes later. I watched as my husband, now performing the role of the wronged husband, frantically explained to the officer that his unstable wife had locked him out of his own home. The officer, looking calm and professional, walked to the door and knocked. This was my cue. I opened the door, not wide but enough to speak through. I presented a picture of perfect, rational calm. "Yes, officer, is there a problem?" I asked politely. I handed him my driver's license, confirming my identity, and then I handed him the certified copy of the deed to the house. I explained the situation simply and factually. "This is my property, owned solely by me before my marriage. The man on the porch is my husband, and his parents were temporary guests who refused to leave. They have all been legally notified that they are no longer welcome here." The officer looked at the deed, then back at my husband. The entire dynamic of the situation shifted. This was not a domestic dispute, it was a property rights issue, and I was the one holding all the cards. The officer explained to my husband in a firm but patient voice that he could not force me to let them in. He informed them that this was a civil matter and that if he wanted to contest it, he would have to do so in court. He then suggested, for the second time, that they find somewhere else to stay for the night. The look of absolute crushing humiliation on their faces was my reward. Standing on the curb with their luggage and their cheap souvenirs, exposed and powerless, they were a pathetic sight. They had been so confident in their victory, so sure of my weakness, that they never saw the defeat coming. The divorce was, as my lawyer had predicted, a clean kill. He tried to claim that the house was marital property. My lawyer eviscerated that claim in under 5 minutes, presenting the deed and my premarital financial records. He was awarded nothing. He was left with nothing but his share of the credit card debt from the cruise and a storage unit full of things that were a constant reminder of the life he had so arrogantly thrown away. I never spoke to any of them again. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he moved in with his parents, their grand conquest having ended in a shared defeat. The house is quiet now. It is filled with my music, my books, and the scent of the roses that are finally thriving again. In trying to take my home, they gave me the greatest gift I could have asked for. They gave it back to me whole and complete. They taught me that my kindness is not a weakness and that my sanctuary is worth fighting for. They were so focused on changing the locks, they forgot that the most important thing was to have the respect of the person who owned the house in the first place. Thanks listening this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Share this story with your friends and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Revenge Laura for more episodes.